Alright, so this is going to be what if Deku had Black Bolt's powers. So with that being said, let's just roll the intro.
They took it to 10. Let me tell you how I come through with the 1-2, kicking shit like kung fu. Treat a bad bitch like she average. I'm a savage, little hoe, what you want do? I'm about cash if the raw fast. I'ma get that little nigga by any means.
Alright, so before we begin this kind of what if, I would like to say that this was actually a request. And I did do my research, to do this kind of what if because I'm not too certain on his powers still. It's kind of confusing on how it works and how it's worded and what I could find online and videos and things like that. So if I get anything wrong, then you could tell me, and if I miss the power, you could also tell me that. So Black Bolt's powers have to do with him being an inhuman, which is basically kind of like a more evolved human, I guess, or like a mutant. So his power is basically he's able to control he's kind of like particles and particle reactions, I believe that's how they describe it. And basically it's connected to the part of his brain that like has to do with communication and speaking and stuff like that. So because of that, if he like talks even a little bit, then the particles it will manipulate energy in a way where it will become like quasi sonic energy, I believe, which is basically like a shock wave or a very loud voice, right? And this will basically destroy nearly anything that's in his path. So we're not going to give him every power because we're basically going to give him like every power except for like one, which I believe it's called like cosmic awareness or something like that, which basically he's able to have like almost any information at any time. So yeah, we're not going to give him that. So he could have energy manipulation, he could fly, he has a superhuman strength and speed, he has advanced sensing, he could shoot like energy blasts out of his hands and things like that. So yeah, also that kind of scream. And he also has telepathy. So we're gonna give Deku basically all those powers except cosmic awareness. So if I miss any powers, tell me down below, because this is what I could find and it's kind of confusing to me still how his powers work. But yeah, so we're gonna say that Deku was actually born with this quirk, and when he was born there was like, how babies cry. This was actually shaking up the hospital. So I would believe in this kind of quirk society they would have a scenario or a plan for this scenario where a kid is born with a uncontrollable quirk. So what they would do is something similar to what they did in the comics for Black Bolt, which is basically they put him in this kind of soundproof room and they put this kind of suit on they put him in this kind of like container, right? You know how like newborns are put in the kind of like little thing if they're like sick or something. It's basically the same thing, but this is actually to collect any energy that is emitted from Deku, right? So this would, time would pass and Inko would ask to see her son, and she'd be able to see him, but he would have to be contained here basically for long periods until like his quirk was, kind of controlled at a certain point. So that's kind of how it is for a few years until we get to the age where Deku could kind of speak, and kind of this is when he develops his like telepath ability, because they are told, or the doctors tell Inko and Deku that he's not really like allowed to talk because of what would happen if his powers went off, right? Because it's connected to his, like what I said before, like a part of his brain that has to do with communication and speaking, right? So after a while they teach him sign language, right? So he'd be able to talk, but through this he was able to find out that he actually has telepathy. So the doctors are like, okay, so he has this sort of like energy manipulation with his voice and his mind, but he also has telepathy, right? And this is kind of interesting to them because not many people in My Hero have multiple quirks, or even like quirks that have multiple abilities. So it'd be very interesting to have kind of really how would you say, like the quirks have a lot of synergy with them. So eventually they would let him out around the age of, let's say around the age where he would go to the quirk doctor usually. So most of his like early life he was stuck at the hospital because of the manner of his quirk. And this is kind of around the time where he's actually able to go come out of the hospital and kind of integrate back into society. So the doctors, they give him this kind of like headband with a little like rod, or like a fork or rod kind of thing on his head, basically what Black Bolt has on his forehead. And this is to help control his power and to kind of focus it, right? I believe that's what it does. So we get to the part where he actually has to enroll into school, and Inko tells Deku to not to speak, and if you need to talk to people, use your telepathy quirk and things like that, right? So this is basically when he gets to school. Deku becomes a very quiet person, and he basically, they would tell the people running that kind of daycare slash, I don't know if it's daycare or like kindergarten or preschool. I think it's preschool, but basically they would tell the people running the place about his quirk and things like that. So they would kind of discourage kids from like talking to him or asking him to talk out loud. So he would basically, whenever he needed something, he would use telepathy. And people would kind of see this really weird and ask like, why don't you talk? And Deku kind of explained that if he talks, then things can go bad. Things are gonna be destroyed if he does anything like that. So I think this would be around the time where Bakugo would get his quirk, and he wouldn't believe him, right? And he would kind of try to force him and kind of bully him into like trying to talk, right? Because he thinks he has the strongest quirk. And Deku one day just has enough of this, right? He doesn't go up to Bakugo, right? He goes up to like he tells Bakugo like, come check this out, right? And he goes up to a tree, and he says the quietest thing that no one can really hear around him. Like he says like, move, right? And it's like a very quiet whisper when he says it. And this basically obliterates the tree and then almost anything behind it, right? For a few 100 meters, I would say, or something like that. Because I don't know the extent to his power, because it says like at a like full power he could destroy planets, but I'm not sure how strong like a little whisper would be. So we could say it's like 100 meters in the direction that he yelled, and the tree would just be like completely gone, and Bakugo would be like in horror of this, right? And this is when he kind of, Deku would get bullied at this age because of how his quirk is seen, and how Bakugo kind of is the popular kid and is spreading these kind of rumors about him being a villain, right? And because of this experience, this gives Izuku or Deku the motivation to actually train. So he trains most of his life into how not to speak and different ways of using his powers, using that energy in different ways. And I would believe that he would learn how to kind of absorb the power into himself, and this would give him super strength, super speed. And then he would also learn how to shoot it out of kind of blasts, and things like that. Also, there's like a force field he's able to do. So we could give him the basic powers here. So in this like kind of what, like 10 years, not 10, probably like 7 or 8 years of him training, he would basically unlock most of his powers. I guess the only one he would not learn would be I guess the force field, because I think he'll learn that later on. But he knows flight and how to reabsorb the power into his body. Yeah, so that's basically how it would go. So with the flight, he could, fly up to 500 miles per hour at, let's see, I believe it was for six hours at a time. So that's kind of a, it's not at the speed of sound. It's like 200 or 300 miles per hour, like less, but it is pretty fast still, especially in My Hero. It's not really comparable to All Might, because All Might can go like 3 times or Mach 3. So yeah. So we get to the day of, the last day of middle school, and this is when the teacher actually gives out the flyers for people to go into different jobs. But he's like, nah, I know you guys just want to like become heroes, so he kind of like throws the papers away or around, right? And this is when he kind of announces that there are two students that are actually wanting to go to UA, and these 2 students are Bakugo and Midoriya. So he kind of tells them this, and Bakugo's like, what? That villain wants to go to UA? Like that will ever happen, right? And basically at this point, Deku, he's been bullied his entire life. I would think more harshly than it does in canon, because of how people think he is a villain and how destructive his quirk could be. So when Bakugo comes and, messes with him and like burns his journal, Deku kind of gives him this like glare, and Bakugo is kind of freaked out by this because he knows what he could do. And Deku kind of opens his mouth, and Bakugo like kind of gets scared and runs off, right? And this is when Deku just kind of walks away, being the last day, right? And he goes and picks up his journal just like in canon, and he goes and walks home using the shortcut. And this is when the sludge villain actually attacks Deku, and Deku's a lot more, stronger in every sense of the word. So I think what Deku would do in this scenario is that he would just fly out of it. And the way that the kind of flight works is that he changes electrons into anti-electrons, and this basically makes like a anti-gravity like field around him. He could also focus his energy to make it where it becomes like a solid platform for people to stand on or walk on. So yeah, Deku would just kind of fly out of the sludge villain, and kind of like at this point I think he would just shoot him with some energy blasts. I think that's what it's called. I think it's called consecutive blast, but there isn't too much information on this move, so that's what I would say would happen. So what would happen is that the sludge villain would be scared and thinking that it was a bad idea, and he would try to run. But then this is when All Might would come and basically uses like Detroit Smash to kind of knock out the villain and then put him in the bottles, right? And this is when Deku would kind of fanboy over All Might, because in this one he still idolizes All Might, even though he has a quirk, and a pretty powerful one at that, because he was bullied all his life, and All Might and his always having that smile would like encourage him to keep going on and keep training his quirk, right? So All Might would be like, whoa kid, what's your power? Because he would see this kind of energy around him to make him like fly and shoot beams. And I'm not sure what to call his quirk. You guys can tell me down below. We could call it Black Bolt for now, since that's the character we're basing off the powers from. So for now we'll just call it Black Bolt, but if you have a better like name for it, then you could tell me down below. So he would say that his power is Black Bolt, and he's able to control, or he wouldn't say this out loud, he would use telepathy. And All Might's like, whoa, this kid has another quirk? And Deku's like, my power is Black Bolt, and it lets me control particles and particle reactions to a certain extent. And I think that's how you describe his power. It's very confusing. I didn't understand it too much. So if I got that kind of description wrong, then you could tell me. So yeah, All Might would be like, wow, this kid's like really powerful. I hope, and he's like, he would basically tell Deku like, well, I hope you like get into UA. You have a really powerful quirk, and you be a great hero. And because he says that, he doesn't like attach himself or even fly next to All Might, because All Might just said that he could be a great hero. And basically what happens is I don't know if the telepathy is like two ways with Black Bolt, so you guys can tell me that too. But yeah, so hearing these words of encouragement would make Deku kind of train even harder than he did before. So in these like 10 months, I think he would learn how to do, that force field, like I said, and he would learn how to make those like solid like platforms for people to stand on. So yeah. So we'll get into the kind of entry exams. For the entry exams, I think on the test he would do a little bit better than he does in canon, since he was training so hard, not only physically but also mentally. And since I'm gonna say he has like higher intelligence than usual because of the kind of idea of like Inhumans being like smarter and like better than normal humans, I believe. So we're just gonna give him that kind of like idea of him like being like smarter than usual. So we would get into the entry exams, or the I guess practical part of the exams, where he has to go into that kind of city and destroy the robots. So Deku, he wouldn't like before I would like to say that when he gets to UA, he wouldn't trip, because he's more confident and he has powers to make him fly, so he wouldn't do that. So what would happen is that he would just kind of go around. When the timer starts, he would like basically fly in and basically shoot robots as he goes along, basically one-shotting them. And then after a long period of time of doing this is when around the time where the zero pointer actually comes through, and they hear a scream and everyone's running away from the scream. So Deku would fly in that direction, and he would see that it's this girl screaming, and this giant robot would come. So what Deku would do at this point is that he would just fly and go up to the robot and just say, disappear, right? And like kind of a whisper, and this would just basically destroy the head of the robot, and it would just stop moving, not tipping over at all, just kind of sitting there like a statue. And this is when Deku would run, like fly down and kind of remove the kind of rubble off of Uraraka, and he would use his telepathy to basically tell her like, are you okay? Are you like injured in any way? And things like that, right? And this is when the timer would go out, and Recovery Girl would come and kind of heal Uraraka, right? So Uraraka would thank him, and yeah, so we would cut back a little bit later into the day, where Deku and his mother are having like dinner, and she would ask him like, do you think you did well on the exams? And he basically uses, like, whenever he talks, I'm just gonna say he uses telepathy, right, until like parts where he actually uses his like powers. So basically he would say that yes, I have, there's almost 100% guarantee that I made it in. I even saved another student, and Inko would be like, wow, my son's actually going to become a hero. And they would kind of finish with dinner, and he would walk back into his room and kind of just sit there until he gets the letter. And this is when Inko would kind of scramble through the doorway and basically say, it's a letter from UA. And Deku would take it, open it up, and it's a projectile, or it's a what's it called? It's basically a hologram of All Might, basically saying that, kid, you caught like the top score, and you were able to save someone. You're going to be a great hero, and I hope to see you at UA. Welcome to the Hero Academia. And Deku's kind of like, he's very emotional at this point because all of his life he's been called like a villain and things like this. So I think he would be crying in this scenario. So yeah, he'd be very emotional to hear his like his kind of hero tell him this. So I'm gonna end it here, and then in the next part we'll go over the heroes versus villains and the quirk assessment and things like that, right? So yeah, if you have anything to say about this kind of what if, like powers that I missed out on or how to describe it and the quirk name, tell me down below. Also, I'm almost at 1,000 subscribers, so I'd really appreciate if you guys can subscribe. And yeah, with that being said, this is going to be the end of the video. So yeah,